This is such an exciting moment for me. In a way, it's sort of, we're coming full circle. We've spent the last sort of pandemic period retracing every exhibition that our main gallery has put on since we opened in fall of 2014. And we've gone backwards through time, so which means that tonight, the event was meant to launch the archive for the on-site exhibition, which was our very first exhibition. And so we wanted to do something a little bit different. We took some time to sort of think this through. And it led to this sort of unusual project that we're all going to participate in tonight, which is that, you know, we're now at the 6-year mark since we've opened the gallery. The world is at a sort of a turning point in terms of how we go about what happens next, which also means that the arts are asking these same questions. So in a way, the thought that we have is that we take this moment to crowdsource ideas for the future, or even perhaps my strategic plan, for which I'll give you all credit if it comes out of this. Because every 5 years, you know, you need to revise your strategic plan and think forward. So I'm going to take a short moment just to glance at that first exhibition, and then we're going to come back, and that will suffice for my origin story, and then we'll go through the other founders who've joined us tonight to think about founding arts organizations and how to think about responding to where we are now in each moment of each founding of each organization. So I'm going to share my screen. It's here. Okay. So the very first exhibition that we had at the gallery was called On Site. And at the time, Saadiyat Island had very few structures. The Louvre had not opened yet. Montserrat was periodically having exhibitions, and there were 2 hotels, and then there was us. And so the first exhibition looked at the question of where we were physically and how our physical location tells us about itself and about each other, how we tell each other about who we are through the projects that we build, the memories that a site holds. And I brought together in this first exhibition, this was sort of my moment to talk about what and how we would think about an art gallery on a desert island with an audience yet to be developed. And I will just show you a few images here. This was the entrance to the space at the time. For those who know the space, this is where you now would meet our reception desk. We had a series of photographs by Tariq Al-Hussein, which were photographs of the landscaping of Saadiyat Island. And the moment that you landscape a natural island, culture and nature become inextricable. So we're using nature to tame nature and to establish culture. And I thought this was a really beautiful moment to capture in the shift of to being of the location that Saadiyat Island eventually is growing to be. In the distance, you'll see a structure by Rashid Rana, which we'll come back to. And then you see something like shadows of dappling light on the walls. That is in fact a mural of white on white by the New York artist Mary Temple. And this one, for me, captures that moment where you aren't really sure where you are when you're in a new construction or a new location. And you're not sure if what you see is actually there or not, or what it means. Are we in a tropical island, or are we on a desert island? And then we turn the corner. And this structure is called a room from Tate Modern, or from the Tate. And inside is a 1-to-1 scale model of a gallery at the Tate. And on the exterior is this sort of grid of a scaffolding that's both an homage to Sol LeWitt, but also a reference to a construction site. So this sort of thinks about the museums that are to come on Saadiyat Island. And of course, on the ground, we have the wonderful work by Muhammad Ahmed Ibrahim with the copper wires wrapping the rocks from his home region. And in the distance, you can see paintings by Ebtisam Abdulaziz, also dealing with memories of places that are changing, even as they're still present, when it changes from from Bastakia to Al Fahidi, she makes this series of paintings, sort of erasing her memories of Bastakia. And then Basim Magdi's series of photographs of an ancient volcanic landscape represented and reinterpreted as a science fiction future. And so this was how I used an exhibition, and I used the interaction of these artists to sort of think through with my potential audiences where we are and what are we doing here and what kind of art program are we going to have. And this was, this was not a show that many people saw. People barely knew that we were there yet, which is fine. But the ones that did see it have given me really nice feedback. And it was a really nice show for sort of getting a feel for how these different artists speak to each other here. Because if I showed these same artists in New York City or in Providence, Rhode Island, where I'd been before, or in Dhaka in Bangladesh, which is where I first saw Rashid Rana's piece, they mean something different in a different location. They respond differently to their environment. And this was the most exciting thing for me about inaugurating a new space and thinking about a new program and how we respond in a living way to where we are and to stay in dialogue. Now it's not the same place. Now we have the Louvre next door, we have Warehouse 421, we have Bait 15, we have the Cultural Foundation, and there are many more sort of opportunities for interaction. And it's time to rethink what we do next. And so that leads me to introducing Bana Kattan, who at the time was my curator and worked very closely with me on the conceptualization and the realization of the vision and mission that we had developed. And Bana played a really key role in also helping me as I shifted from sort of a US perspective on art and curating to one that is rooted here when I relocated in the beginning of 2012. So we're coming up on, oh my gosh, 9 years soon. But Bana played a really large role in that because she knows all of you and she knows your histories. And I was able to sort of get a crash course thanks to her support. So thank you, Bana, to start. And now I'm going to hand it over to Bana, and she's going to introduce and go through the stories of these other founders who have been so critical to our ecosystem. Okay.
Thank you, Maya.
You're welcome.
I can't believe it was 9 years ago. That's kind of scary.
Yeah.
So this group of esteemed panelists were selected by the NYUAD Art Gallery team because they're all founders of organizations that either their outcome or their initial mission was of community service. And so with that in mind, I was going to go through and ask each panelist about their origin story so that we can all hear the beginnings, which is always exciting. But also just to think about their mission and their motivations and how and if they have evolved throughout the years. But then also during these crazy times to think about the future, which is one of the key thoughts of this that Maya is trying to bring to this panel today. And then, I'm the most excited about the second half of this, where we selfishly take ideas from you. So let's start. I was thinking about starting with Munira. Munira Al-Sayegh is kind of the freshest founder of the panel. She insanely decided to start an organization in the middle of a pandemic. 101 opened in August. And Munira, will you tell us about you and your co-founder, Reis Abdallah's platform, but also which feels very much like a network, just as much as a platform. And then also, since you did start in the middle of a pandemic, is there something that you either are withholding that you are, or is there something that you're waiting to activate that we should know about?
Absolutely. Thank you, Bana. And thank you, Maya. I'm very, very happy to be here with everybody. So 101. 101 started as a thought with Reith and I, my co-founder. And it came out during the pandemic. Actually, in May, we started conversating about, getting involved, how we can get involved during this time, what is needed, and how are we as a pair going to bring our skill set to the table. And so with time, after the initial call, there's a lot of excitement, and we quickly sort of transcended into making it happen. The conversations, what I find interesting in the beginning, were all kind of based around ethics. We didn't know what we were going to be doing exactly, like how we were going to do what we needed to do, but we started off with sort of like our ethical concerns, and our roles and what we can actually bring. And so Raif was telling me, he was like, people are trying to live. There's a lot of sales happening everywhere else in the world. Why isn't that happening here? Why aren't people sort of self-organizing? And as most of you or some of you may know, I enjoy that idea of self-organization through the community, and the community coming together to make something, because I really believe that everything starts locally and then regionally, and then from that we can expand outwards. And quickly, that's exactly what happened. We put our ethics down. We began to realize, okay, we want to do these quarterly sales with non-gallery represented artists as a benchmark for them to know, how to price their works, how to talk about their works. We do artist videos, and to kind of also create a new spectrum of finances for collectors, because we want to sort of open up that social responsibility of collecting, not just to those who can collect, but also to those who maybe don't know much about the arts. So we're trying to humanize it in one way, especially through the artist videos. Now, all of that on one side, the side that really excites me about 101 is the system that we've generated, research about the arts from the region. So we have writers and young writers that we've only recently come across, who we collaborate with to generate research around particular subjects. A lot of the time, the Gulf and the UAE is looked at from the outside in, and then studied sort of in this parachuting way. So for us, we're tapping into that and generating content for the viewers who are in the UAE and in the region, and also for those who are outside. And so, yeah, that sums up 101. And then your second question was?
The second question was if there's anything that you held back on starting, or did you guys go full-fledged pandemic? Who cares?
Yeah, we did. There was a who cares attitude, where we were like, okay, we don't know how long this is gonna last. We need to keep going, and this is the reality. And as Raif has been saying recently, no better time than the present. So, we're just responding to now. I think something that makes me itch, that I would love, is to kind of have programming around this, because that's something that is, dear to me, and I think is important to generate dialogue. But outside of that, I think we really sort of went, straight to the deep end, and we're working out, we're learning as we go, and we're making that very transparent with everybody that we are working with.
Perfect, thank you, Munira.
Thank you.
Okay, now I was thinking we would switch to Sultan and Bergil Art Foundation. Sultan, it seems like Bergil Art Foundation is unbelievably dynamic and constantly evolving. It started as a collection, then a space, and then now you don't have a space, but you have a long-term exhibition at Sharjah Art Museum, which, by the way, I will note that the virtual tour of that exhibition was way ahead of everybody else's virtual tours. And if you haven't seen it, maybe we can link it down. It's for an exhibition called A Century in Flux, that is amazing. And no matter how many times you see it virtually or in person, it's never enough. But going back to my point, Sultan, there seems to be a mission and a motive behind the mission. It seems like the motive is always the same and the mission continues to change. I was wondering if you could give us some insight into, you know, how you adapt and pivot, change directions over time. And if you have this inkling that tells you to do so, or just the fluidity of it is pretty amazing.
Thank you, Bana. Thank you, Maya, for inviting me. This panel really is a panel of rock stars. Each and everyone here is inspiring to me personally and to so many others. I want to say that I think the fact that Barjeel remains a very small organization allows us to be very nimble and agile, and we can adapt. Many other organizations represented here are also the same. I remember in 2014, I think, which was when Sohaila had joined us, we were given 6 weeks notice to put up an exhibition in Abu Dhabi, and we were able to do it. I can't imagine this being done by many other organizations. The idea is when you have a chance, jump on it and make it happen, do your best. It's very difficult, but I think it's doable. I want to share a few slides. Let me see if this works out here. Presenter view. Yes. Can you guys see this? So can you guys see this slide? Yes. Okay. So on February 17th, 2009, I sent an email. It was 12:36 p.m. The email was sent to Manal Ataya of the Sharjah Art Museum. And I said, the email began with, I wanted to ask if Sharjah is open to hosting private collections. And really, Manal Ataya was such a great supporter. Upon that introduction, we reached out to Marwan al-Sirkal, who worked for Sharjah Investment Authority. And then we reached out to Sheikh Ahour and Sheikh Abadour, who also need no introduction. I assembled a small team. Mandy Merzaban was a great supporter and help. Giuseppe Moschetello, who worked for Shuruq, the Sharjah Development Organization, also was hugely important in setting up Barjeel, I think, even though he was an outsider, but he was part of the team. And in March 14th, 2010, we opened this show. This was Peripheral Vision. By then, I had only about 100, 140 artworks. We really tried our best to do as many exhibitions, as many events as possible. This was our first loan that went to an exhibition called Arab Express, kind of a corny name, but it was a big exhibition. And this was our first loan. Our first major show was Singapore Art Museum. We were visited by the Tourism Board of Singapore, and we held this exhibition in Singapore in 2013. But I think really, and most of you would know Barjeel from Whitechapel Gallery. Umar Khulaif, who used to work for Whitechapel and now very happy to say that he is based in Sharjah, really was an instrumental individual in helping us not only, and I'll stop sharing, in helping us not only create this platform, which is Imperfect Chronology, with a major publication, finally our own book, but also I think over the year and a half, Bana, that the exhibition, between planning and between setting up the exhibition, really helped us with advice on what to buy and what not to buy. We definitely weren't very strong with some artists. The collection when we started, and I'm ashamed to say, was heavily male focused, for example, and then we transformed that. It became much more gender balanced. We had more contemporary art, and now we're more modern. So the collection is, as I said, very agile. The fact that that the funding is private also helps. And I think this is a model that has served us very well. I want to say that, as I think, Bana, you mentioned the fact that we went virtual about a couple of years ago. Our agreement with Google is 3 or 4 years old. This allowed us to make sure that this collection is available to everybody. And maybe the last thing I'll say before I end is, since this pandemic started, we've launched at least 3 projects. One is a poetry competition based on works from the collection. So we invited hundreds of submissions actually came in of people writing poems based on works, on artworks. These works are available online for people to view. The second thing we did was put out a call for papers for a book on modern art from the Arabian Peninsula. So the Gulf plus Yemen. Again, this book didn't exist before, still doesn't exist. So hopefully it will exist next year. So we try to take advantage of this pandemic But I want to say that maybe the last thing I would say is that we are part of this community. We are part, everything that Sunny does, that Antonia does, Munira, Rami, I don't want to forget anybody, that Maya, Antonia, everything that they do, really, it is part of this mosaic that comes together and makes this beautiful artwork that is the UAE art community. And I think that we owe so much to you guys. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sultan.
Thank you, Sultan. When we were doing a tech check, Sultan mentioned that these panelists have known each other for 20 years, and they haven't been on a panel together yet. So this is a very special and indeed a part of an ecosystem. Okay, so next I was going to ask Sunny to talk about the third line. So the third line is a commercial gallery, but nobody can deny that it was extremely active in the early days, doing community events that are beyond what a normal commercial gallery would do. And so, Sunny, I was wondering if you could talk us through the founding of the space in 2005 versus 10 years later in 2015 versus what's going on at a time like this now.
Yes, thank you, Bana, and thank you, Maya and NYU Abu Dhabi for hosting us. And it's really great actually to be in this room with all of the participants. It's true, we haven't all been together, and we are all old friends. So yeah, I mean, I think speaking what Sultan was saying and continuing from there, it's true, we are really a community that's still very close-knit and sort of an ecosystem that works together. I mean, the story of the third line, and it's true, we are a commercial gallery, is that we had first intended to actually, we attempted to be a space that didn't really have a definition of a sort of commercial gallery necessarily, because we were not even sure what that would look like. So it was 2005 when the third line opened in Al Quoz in a warehouse at a time where it wasn't sort of common to be there, and now that area has become quite sort of the place for galleries, and Al Circal has opened, and it's changed a lot since we moved. But before that, even I think it's important to say that myself and some other people had come back to Dubai. We call ourselves the Dubai kids, and had this sort of wondering why there weren't artists that that we knew and we were discovering shown, or why there was no platforms, why there was no art galleries, why there was nothing really going on in that sense. And we very quickly realized that there was other people also thinking along the same lines. And we basically decided we tried actually to set up a nonprofit, but that was not feasible at the time. I don't think it's still feasible now, actually. And hearing Munira speak earlier made me feel a lot like how I felt at the beginning. So it was really that. I mean, the impetus for it, or the seed, or the intention was to create a space, a platform where artists from not only the Gulf, but also the Gulf, and also the wider Middle East, Iran and North Africa, could be exhibited, learned about, seen. We also did many other things initially in our first space. We did film screenings, we hosted talks, we did these Pecha Kucha series, we did a whole craft series, we did a book club. We had a book club where you would read books by Arab authors, and then you would we'd read it in Arabic or English, and then everybody would meet and discuss what was lost in translation, essentially. So we did a lot of things that I think were not necessarily on the remit of what you consider now to this day a commercial gallery. And the reason we did that was because we felt, well, at the time there were no institutions. So this was before any of the institutions, and before the art fairs, before a lot of things. But it was very evident that was also this moment. I feel like there was this, we always say the stars were definitely aligned, because very quickly we realized that there was there was an audience for what we were doing. There were people that were looking and also wanting to learn about artists from the region. So very quickly we found our home and our friends, and we started to really nurture, let's say, this community, which now looking back, we're 15, we turned 15 this year. So it's, it doesn't feel like that long ago, but what has happened in these 15 years and where Dubai is, the UAE is, the rest of the Middle East, but also these artists that were virtually unknown. People, I mean, one of the reasons I personally was interested in, or I had these questions, is because I'm, from Iran. I grew up in Dubai, and I was studying in New York, and I was in London and Paris, and I was in all these places, and I would never see any Arab artists being represented. I mean, there were maybe two at the time, Bana Kattan and Shireen Nashat were the only two that I remember. There were probably a few others, but I'm forgetting. But I was very disappointed. I said, well, where are our generation of artists? So again, coming back to what Munira was saying, it's like, these artists are there and they don't have platforms. So that was really why the Third Line began. And I'm really happy because I feel like that moment has culminated into this moment, which is now, I mean, we have amazing spaces. We have amazing institutions that set up, we have the NYUAD gallery that is doing amazing things as well in Abu Dhabi. We have, we have a cinema. We have an independent cinema. I mean, that was something that I could have never imagined that would happen. And you have the Jamil Arts, and you have everything, everyone here and more, and it's only in this short span of time. So I think that was a real, I don't know, I think that was really a sort of a UAE moment, or like a Dubai. I mean, I don't know where else that could happen. And people often sort of would criticize, this part of the world for certain things not being a certain way. And I'm like, well, it's so young. Everything is really just beginning. And it's really been an incredible journey to be a part of it. Sorry, did I answer the question or go on too long?
Well, in that line, since you've seen all of this change, I'm wondering, how has your audience changed, or how has your following changed? And I really think we should bring back the book club. It sounds amazing.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, the book club was amazing. Actually, we had some really, really hardcore followers of the book club. They were very upset when we had to, the thing is, I wasn't a part of the book club because I'm a very slow reader. So the person that was leading the book club, Katrina, would read books, and then she would so I always felt, but yeah, we'll bring it back. We'll bring it back. And well, what has changed is, like everything, when you start, you start with this intention and a vision for something, and you're not necessarily sure exactly where it's going to go. You hope that, you're not the only person that is thinking this. And we realized very quickly we were not the only ones thinking this, and that there was a space for it. There was an audience for it. And we were really encouraged by that. And like, again, what Munira said, we were making it up as we were going along. We really didn't, there was no rule book. Maybe we would look at spaces in New York or London or Paris or Tokyo, and just like, oh, maybe it could be like this or like that, but it couldn't be like that because this was a very specific place and it has its own culture, and we had to model it into whatever, it had to be here. But like all things, you grow and you sort of, I think 2007 to 2010 were these real sort of really fast moving years. I always, feel like things happen really quickly, and I kind of don't even really have so much idea of how it happened. But suddenly we did become very much a commercial gallery because a lot of our artists started to be recognized for exactly what they should be recognized. They were fantastic artists, and people just didn't know about them. And then suddenly they were learning about them. So then we got really busy just focusing more on the artists and what we were doing with that. So we did, unfortunately, stop doing more, some of our programming, but also because other spaces were opening. So perhaps our audiences became like more, not less, we still had our local audiences, but we were also now taking our artists out to the world. So we were doing art fairs, we were doing, shows all around the world. And we did have started to have a more international audience, but we never forgot, and to this day, I mean, now I feel like, sometimes I feel like we're back in 2005. That's how it feels right now. But and it's a good thing, because it's really remembering, how it all began. But yeah, I mean, things have changed, but many things have stayed the same. And I think that the community that supported us and it's still very much in effect, here we are, will be the community that will move forward with, yeah.
Thank you, Sunny. So when you were talking about, starting and potentially starting as a nonprofit, and then and how, not the UAE is not necessarily a place that has like a traditional 501c3 or nonprofit organization. It makes me think of Antonia, and how, the Art Jameel, when Jameel Art Center specifically opened in 2018, it kind of distinguished itself as not a traditional family foundation. It's not like Ford Family Foundation, or it does give grants, like they did in the recent micro grants during the pandemic. It does have exhibitions. It kind of does it all, and then right when you think that there can't be any more, you're actually opening a new space in Jeddah. If you could talk to us, Antonia, about founding the Art Center, as well as how it fits into the vision of the Jameel family mission, and then also just the fact that there's the sister organizations, and how they all play into it, and whether or not we even need a headquarters, because it kind of seems like, when you're scattered everywhere, it seems like the pandemic matches with a place that has not one location.
Well, thank you, Bana. And yeah, I'm kind of slightly regretting going last, because this is making me so nostalgic. It's amazing to be here and talk about these histories with the really close colleagues and friends, as you said, some of them for 20 years. And I really echo what Munira was saying. I mean, we're all learning all the time, and I think that's the beauty of doing what we do. And we often take big jumps into the deep end of the swimming pool, and Jameel Art Centre definitely felt like that, like a huge leap off the diving board. And just to echo what Sultan was saying, I mean, I love being part of this mosaic, and I think this is what makes it really kind of special to work here. So, yes, I mean, the Art Jameel, or the Jameel family kind of mission, is very much around this idea that the arts can kind of open up a space in society that's discursive and that can impact in multiple ways, not only within the art sphere, but much broader than that. And also this idea that the arts, I guess, underpins their philosophy, is that the arts are very much for all, and that there's no kind of disparity, if you like, between putting on really high quality, challenging programs and reaching out to a mass public. So that kind of underpins everything we think about. And just, we don't actually normally give grants at all. It was just this year we felt it was right for a kind of pivot, and we literally took all our budget that we would have spent on traveling or putting on public programs, and even down to kind of what we saved on our DEWA bill by being closed, and put all that into micro grants for artists. Something special for this year, which we're really proud that we managed to do. But yeah, I mean, Art Jameel has been going since 2003. I joined in 2016, just at a time when Jameel Art Centre was the foundations, the foundations of the building were there, but it was up to us to build it kind of physically and conceptually. And, and it's an enormous, absolutely can't be underestimated, the privilege it is to work, to join a building that's going up, and to be able to be part of that kind of very fabric, and to walk around a construction site with a hard hat on, thinking about future visitors and how will they come into the building and what will they experience. And we obviously work very closely with Siri, who are the architects of the building, and perhaps even more closely with the consultant architects YY, who people might know as IBDA, or might know as Wael and Terremoto, who are the architects that are representing the UAE at the next Venice Biennale of Architecture, who are incredible people to work with. And we also had this kind of parallel mission to sort of pivot Art Jameel itself, the wider foundation. So it was known as somebody who worked in partnership with others to deliver programs, as something of a funder. We had 3 employees in Dubai, and we pivoted around to kind of thinking of ourselves as a producer of programs, which would then be supported by others. So that was quite a major kind of shift. And we have 26 people on the team now in Dubai. And And I guess the idea was also about trying to create an arts institution that was very porous. So this idea of the architecture itself being porous. If you've been to Jameel Arts Centre, you'll know that there are gardens that are open 24/7. You know, the building has multiple entrance and exits. So it in itself kind of tries to embrace a public and draw them into the building. And then we wanted to do the same with the program as well. So we had this kind of 2-year period of being in our project space in Al Sakal, which is a collaboration with Al Sakal, and the team coming together. And it was a kind of really utopian time of thinking, how can we build a different kind of institution? How can we constantly challenge ourselves? How can we, you know, could it build something that was very much like Sunny was saying, you know, build something that was from the ground up, that was from the UAE, but kind of then opened up to the rest of the world, rather than being something that was a kind of import model. And we felt very strongly, like you do Sunny, and everybody here, about that there's, you know, the UAE has a particular role as a kind of hub and a place that brings together different people, but it also has a great wealth of talent here itself that it can project to the rest of the world. And then when we were about to move into the building, I mean, it had been such a major challenge and such a struggle to get this building built. And then we started to feel really nostalgic as a team of like, oh no, we were living this utopian moment. We thought we could change the world. And now we're going to become an institution. That was like, oh, what can we do about this? So we decided actually that we should always retain that kind of way of working. We should constantly challenge ourselves. We should work with artists who challenge us, and specifically ask them to challenge us and to learn from those artists through every exhibition and every work that we acquire and everything like that. And we did a session, Bana Kattan, who's head of research and learning, and I had a kind of brainstorm with Hamad Nassar, who many of you will know as well, who's also curated a UAE pavilion in Venice. And together we came up with this idea for the library of thinking in public, and that this should underpin everything we do. So rather than think we're an institution that projects onto the community, instead invite the community in to think with us about what we can be and who we can be, and to be as open as possible about that. And then when we opened in November 2018, it was a very emotional moment. And I guess that kind of idea of thinking in public and about kind of the relevance of programming really came to the fore. So we did this kind of 2-part program, if you like. And the main exhibition, Crude, on oil archives and oil histories and experiences, was curated by Murtaza Vali. And then in our sculpture park, we collaborated with Dubai Holding and asked Dubai Holding to invite everybody that lives in their flats and apartment blocks around Dubai, and to invite them to the opening, so that we would think together with the community that lives around us. And it was incredible. We had 12,000 people in the opening week, and we had queues outside the door. It was like a nightclub. We were like 1 in, 1 out, you know, it was really incredible. And we did a kind of, we surveyed people, and the vast majority of our audiences had never been to a museum before, but they were reacting to these works of art in Crude as if they were telling them their own personal family histories. So I think it was this idea of, you know, the work can be as challenging as you like, challenging, you know, if you think of a non-museum going public, but the medium and the presentation needn't be a barrier if the histories and stories that you're presenting are acutely familiar to your audience. And it was, you know, people reacted very emotionally to it. And I know I'm going over time, but just very quickly, I wanted to mention 2 other endeavors that we've got up to while in the UAE. I mean, I was thinking about Sunny, you coming in to the Time Out offices where I was working in 2002, and saying, hey, we're starting this magazine, Badoon, you should come be a part of it. And, you know, I was working for Dubai Film Festival at the time and the art newspaper. And it was that moment of kind of setting up Badoon and thinking about what kind of, if we're thinking about founding institutions, a magazine can be an institution. It can feel, when there's no other magazine that addresses this kind of idea of that if your identity is unfixed, that can be something that's positive, you know, that, and really kind of brought together a community that was very dispersed, but one that was very kind of UAE at the same time. And then thinking about other kinds of institutions that are also homegrown. Art Dubai in 2006 was the first kind of major fair to set up in Asia, you know, before Hong Kong, Delhi, other places. So that great proliferation of Asian and West Asian art fairs began in Dubai. And again, very similar to Munira's thing of, you know, let's just kind of do this, you know, it could work, let's try, and not being afraid of failure. And also similar to the third line, Art Dubai kind of filling gaps that weren't there. So we, you know, the Global Art Forum led to Campus Art Dubai, and artist projects began to be a year-round thing. So it was just kind of responding to the community. And we worked really closely with Rami and of course Sultan on these projects as well. It was all part of a very big community. And I think this lack of rule book that you mentioned, Sunny, and the idea of there kind of being no canon of institution building is incredibly liberating. So, you know, we often tend to think of, you know, kind of the franchise model, or we think of the UAE as being somewhere that always has a little bit of a tinge of cultural cringe. You know, if something comes from outside, then maybe it's somehow better than something that you build yourself within. And I think today's talk is very much about kind of actually, you know, here we have a particular space to be innovative and to think kind of about programming that's really relevant and really kind of reinvent the model anew. And that's where we can be at our strongest and actually at our most globally relevant when we're thinking from our own kind of community. Yeah, and now we're in this turning point, paradigm shift, so we have to reinvent all over again.
Thank you, Antonia, for priming our visitors to think about this very thought, which will go into our questioning as soon as we do the breakout rooms. But before that, we are lucky enough to hear from Rami. Rami, we think of you as an incubator, a perpetual idea generator. You know, with traffic and satellite, and of course, the very near and dear to my heart, the State publication, which I hold on to every copy that I have and I will try to forever. But also, you know, your current endeavor of a space that is a restaurant, but also a library and also a garden, and also a gallery. If you could tell us about this, the process of giving rise and thinking about giving rise to new projects, all of which seem to also evolve and adapt to the times, and somehow always seem to be for the community, and always have open arms to guiding people to come and hang out in the space for longer than whatever the space is offering.
Thank you, Bana, and thank you all. Saraha, honored to be on this panel, and thank you all for listening in. In terms of opening arms and giving rise to everyone, honestly, it's just aiming for unity and balance of sorts, you know, in both creation and exhibition and exchange. And frankly, I learned on the go, and I learned from the people that I worked with. You know, when I started off in 2007 with Traffic, the first Traffic in Al Barsha, you know, it started off as a design gallery and a store and a library, and we did our programming and our studio and our labs. It was, frankly, we were learning on the go. And I still remember I didn't even know what curating means. And I still remember I didn't even know what artist in residency is. Like James Clark comes into me or meets up with me one day, and he's like, Rami, listen, I'm in town, I'm looking for a residency. I'm like, what is a residency? And he explains it to me. And this 6-month residency ends up becoming a 4-year residency, where I learned so much from him and with so many others. Another example is when we worked on the UAE pavilion. I think it's a two-way street. Like, we ended up working on the first UAE pavilion with our studio, and Tirdad was the curator. And honestly, he gave me a crash course on what is curating. So I think for me to have given support, it's other people that have given me support, like Antonia in 2008 asking me to design Art Park and the Bidoon Lounge. Sunny, when I asked her, hey, let me curate an exhibition at the Third Line. And again, guys, you know, I didn't learn any of this. It was all emotional and impulsive, truly. So, so this is it. And then in 2010, I ended up creating a foundation, you know, to support all of this. So we ended up supporting Edge of Arabia when we went to Berlin, along with the Jamils. We ended up helping to produce and fund the Kochi Biennial, which also Sultan supported in. So it's always been this community support. And whenever someone asks me what's special about Dubai, I tell them it's collaborative, not competitive. You know, when you go, I spent a lot of time in London and in New York to see their art scenes there, and there's a lot of competition. So, so yeah, this one thing led to another. The traffic ended up opening another space, and we ended up, artists started coming, because you see, for 2 years, I only represented one artist, right? James Clark. And then artists started coming up to me and saying, hey man, do you want to be our gallerist? And I'm like, honestly, okay, fine, I'll give it a go. And it added up until Ahmed Matar and Abdel Nasser Gharim, and so on. Then we opened Satellite, and then Satellite. So Satellite's been 10 years. It's the only space that we've had active for so long. And that place became a home. Like literally, we've had people that have lived there for a year and a half, from like 2017 till last year. And it's hosted so many things, from the broadcast series to the stage to a studio where we've done so many things. And currently we have something called Warehouse 16. It's a chef's table restaurant where we host 8 people every night. So you come in and you've got a half-an-hour tour of the collection and the art vault that we have, and then you dine, you have a 7-course meal. Then it moved on to general. So what's also nice is that, frankly, I think I don't know if it's ADD, I've never been really diagnosed with it, but I think it's wanting to learn and try out new things and help out. And so we went into general, and it started off as a store. So it was a lot with music and clothing and art as well. And I think what's happened over the last few years is I've stopped creating spaces where people have to come to see the art, and instead I'm bringing art to the people. And so when I see Mesan, for example, Mesan is a restaurant, but it's also known now as a gallery and a library, and we're inviting curators that have never curated in their lives. Actually, a lot of them are artists, telling them, here, curate for the first time. So this is how it's been going.
Thank you, Rami. I think the honest and open curiosity that you have is definitely reflects outwards. With that, I hand it over back to Maya for a transition.
Oh my gosh, you guys, that was amazing. We were supposed to keep it short, but like I think we could go longer. I want more. But now it's time to turn away from the past and look to the future. We are now going to go into breakout rooms. And so all of this wonderful audience who's been listening, it's time for you to tell us about art for you. And we're gonna, each breakout room will have one of the founders whom you have seen speak. So we will break up into these different groups. It'll be the 7 of us, including Bana. And we're gonna ask you 4 questions. And we're going to sort of try to crowdsource ideas for the present and for the future. So get ready to put on your speaking side. And we'll have 10 minutes in that breakout room. And then we'll come back and we'll convene and kind of review the different answers that we got and ideas. And so those questions are, what didn't we get right? Where did we fail? That's one. How would you like to engage with art now and in the future? And this is a big question because of the, there's a lot of this sort of virtual world, the physical gallery, the institution, the artist studio, the public. 3, local versus global. What is needed? Where have we lost and gained from the institutionalization that we're seeing in the development of the UAE? And what is the responsibility of art in a civic context? So I think worldwide we're seeing crises and challenges and questions. And there's an urge to try to use art to solve these problems or respond. How do we support art? How do we respond to these problems? What do you think the role of art should or should not be in a civic context? And I'm going to take those questions. I'm going to paste them into the chat. And Sebastian will now randomly put us into our different groups, and I'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Okay, so I think that was not even close to enough time. We barely made it through question number 1, so this is a good lesson. We were afraid it was going to be too long, but in fact it was the opposite. And what I want to do is have us come back and regroup and continue this conversation, but the muting and the unmuting is handled by Sebastian. So you'll have to either raise your hand or use the little blue hand icon, which you can find under participants. All right, so where shall we start? Here's what I have, and then we'll see where other people got. In the what have we done wrong or where have we failed? One is related to, many of them tie into research and knowledge production about the history and existence of Arab art history. And those show up in, we need and we should have better documentation of exhibitions for historical purposes. Research in Arabic that has been conducted and overlooked because it's in Arabic. And so that in the English language history of Arab art, we suddenly are reinventing the wheel that actually may have already been researched and written. And so a need for translation and dissemination of that existing research. And then May Al-Dabakh was making a point about the politics of translation and knowledge production and dissemination, and that it's not that straightforward sometimes. And then finally, as we started to work towards question number 2 was raised, well, there was also the question of journalism and critical engagement that's needed, and how the different arts, and I know that Bill Bragan and I can relate to this, can feel like separate islands in the UAE. So the music, the performing arts, the music, visual art, and so on, we tend to have no awareness of each other across these different disciplines, and that this is a connection that's needed, or that would be meaningful and is a missed opportunity if we speak in terms of failures, but also something we would like to see in terms of how we engage with art now more holistically. That's my summary. Who wants to go next?
Yeah,
I see Sultan raising his hand, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so what we did, first of all, I think we had the coolest room. Okay.
No.
Maya, what we did is that we went from the 4th question back. So we went 4, 3, 2, 1. So with regards to do art organizations have a civic responsibility, and I want to emphasize that I'm channeling their answers. These are not my answers. We had eclectic conversation about, yes, they do have a civic responsibility. We do have to try and democratize education, make art available for the world, and save untold stories, put people in conversation. However, when you try to make art do something, there is a risk that it becomes propaganda. Also, whose responsibility is it? The artist or the institution with regards to civic responsibility? And the 3rd question, what is lost and what is gained from focusing on international versus local exposure? One of the points that was made is that when you go international, the context sometimes is lost. Another thing was said is that sometimes, especially here in the UAE, artists who don't speak English were left behind. They felt that there was no room for them. They felt that their English language wasn't as good. Question number 2, how would you like to engage art in the future? We had a participant from Japan who says that they can still stay part of the UAE arts community, that they studied at NYU Abu Dhabi, and now they're in Japan, and they can continue to be part of the UAE arts community. But against is you lose the energy of the artwork. When you don't see it in person, when you only see the art virtually, you lose the energy of the artwork. We didn't really get to the first question.
I'm really glad you guys worked your way backwards. That way we got some coverage. Thank you.
Sunny, go ahead.
So yeah, so we also didn't get, we started the other way with question number 1, and we just finished at 2. We didn't have that much time, and I agree with what everyone's saying. There should be a part 2. So where did we fail? The participants, well, we had one discussion actually, which was around language, and that many Arab artists were sort of, maybe the ones who didn't speak English were not part of, and this was going back to from the 80s to now. So it wasn't just about, when, let's say, the third line started, but I said that when we first started, we actually used to translate our publications in Arabic, in English and in Arabic, and this idea of like, why isn't anything in English, and why, in Arabic also, including this talk. So it limits people to English speaking only, which, you know, I agree, we're failing. We failed at that today. But also then we had a comment that, well, you know, Dubai is you know, it's pretty much the first language, it seems. So we are in Dubai, and why should it also be in Arabic? And so that was what we got with where did we fail? That was the main discussion. And then how would you like to engage with art? Which, same as Sultan's experience, we had Valentin, who's in Uruguay. He used to be at NYU in Abu Dhabi, and he actually is logged in now from Uruguay, which is 7 hours behind, I think. And he was asking me why we haven't yet put our programs fully online and what we're doing about that. And I said, we're building our website, we're slow. But yeah, so, you know, that the fact that, you know, I think a lot of, I mean, I also was asking, what can we do? But I think, yes, being more available online seems to be welcome and encouraged. So, and then we didn't get to any other questions, unfortunately.
Can go next.
Go ahead, Munira.
So we barely like scraped the surface of question one, because that's due to my lack of time management and excitement over all of the conversation that was being generated. Generally, like overall, I think what we did get was that there's this lack of engagement with the wider community, like it's sort of lack of a door that people can access to arrive into spaces with other creatives and have like really raw, critical dialogue. And so as we were discussing now, we're thinking how helpful this is and how interesting it would be if it happened on a sort of a more consistent pace, you know, where we had a particular subject and we just come in and, you know, get to know each other through this discourse. So that seemed to take a big part of the conversation, and then we went on to discussing the issue of transparency. The fact that, you know, you don't find the information that you need immediately accessible to you, and not just to you, but between peers, colleagues, and institutions. A lot of the times, you know, you have this issue where like 30 things are happening on the same weekend between Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Sharjah, and you know, you wonder, why is this happening? What hasn't there been a conversation between these guys prior in order to kind of consolidate dates that work so that we're all in support with one another? From that, Lana brought up a really valid point, and the timer was ticking, so I was like rushing my notes down. But to incorporate what we do within education, within this, not just within the arts education or history, but also looking at how arts and sciences can come together, and kind of really tapping into that in order to build the community and build generations to come. And that's where we left off at. We didn't get to question two, so I'd be curious to see if we get the chance to open up the dialogue with the wider participants now.
Great, and then we have Antonia. Yes, please.
Yeah, I'll be really quick because we were hopeless in our group. We barely got through one question. But we started at number 4, and thinking about civic responsibility, and there was a really great comment from Dana Asadek, and she was referring to Bajil particularly, and also Mariah Art Centre, and the ways in which art centres can provide a kind of space for educational learning that you don't get from school, in terms of opening up this kind of idea of art being very much part of a kind of geopolitical, broader kind of conversation going on. And that was super important. And I thought that was a really good point. Nuhais also mentioned about, you did say museums are space for propaganda, which I might have to have a conversation offline with him about that, because it's a super interesting point. But also just kind of thinking about how progressive can we be in the UAE in terms of sort of our institutions being part of the very fabric of society, and really pushing this agenda that art is. This didn't come up in our conversation today, but I heard it from a colleague today that art should be part of the way we look at health, for example, that art is just as much a part of our society as having a kind of, it contributes to it being a healthy society in a very meaningful kind of way. We had a couple of artists in our group from Spain and Venezuela, I think, who were saying that they find that the art situation here very hermetic and that it's not actually open so much to international artists in that regard. And then just to answer a couple of comments there was a few comments in the chat about how the UAE doesn't necessarily open to a broader audience and also doesn't have an indigenous art scene. So for that, I just wanted to mention the Youth Assembly, and I can see quite a few people here who are either exhibiting as part of that or who have organised that and taken over Jameel Arts Centre. If you get a chance to come before November 16th, please do, because their very point was about opening up to a much broader audience than mainly the mainstream exhibitions do. And I think the audience we've had is totally kind of, sort of address that point. And there are 34 artists in that, and they're all from the UAE. And I think we need to also think about what we mean when we say from the UAE. We're maybe using different kinds of terminologies, but I think that what's very special here is that you have this very broad community, and people are bringing all sorts of experiences to the table, which make for a really kind of rich experience. So just to kind of, I'm really honestly not plugging a Jameel Arts Centre program because they have done it all completely themselves. So I'm guilt-free on that. But yeah, there are artists here, and there is an incredible public that is broader and broader by the minute. It's just maybe you don't see them on Zoom calls, but you see them in person.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Antonia. And we have to hear from Rami and Bana before we hopefully can move on to our short Q&A session. Rami, do you want to go first?
Allah Habib. So, sorry, my notes are a bit mixed, but I'll go for it. For the first question, we spoke about financial sustainability and how arts organizations need to find ways on working with that. We spoke about waste, and later on I added the difference between collecting and patronage, which I think is also important. Next point in the same question was about inequality and disparity. And that got us into grants to artists. And the idea, if artists were to show possibilities and motivate responsibilities and become more socially engaged, how that would help. For question 2, we spoke about the changing role of the artist and also again being more socially engaged. And then later on I added online, in the studio, interactive, and alternative. For the third question, we spoke about evolving and being environmentally conscious. And finally, for the fourth question, we spoke about taking our time, balancing institutions of different types, sizes, and kinds, and finally, including artists in the conversation.
Thank you, Rami. And Bana, do you want to?
Wow, Rami, I can't believe you guys got through, and a couple of others, you got through all 4 questions. Very impressive. I shamelessly was a little curious about the people in our group, and I do not regret asking them about themselves a little too much. So the first thing that first came about, I think Laura mentioned Grey Noise and them embracing their failure at their 10-year anniversary with their loser club. And how great embracing failure can actually be. And then Beata was doing a call for more art criticism at full scale, but especially in terms of the culture, in terms of being open to a culture and attitude of talking about work openly and critically. And then Robert said, talked about the importance of deep listening and the growth potential through this listening, especially with the acknowledgement that there's so many other ways of seeing and doing. And when you are in Uber production and Uber exhibition mode, you lose some of that. We also spoke about Abdel Ghani got cut off, but he was talking about having art criticism, yes, but the importance of an art space being a safe space, or a talking space being a safe space, so that These spaces are also open to, you know, maybe the more shy or quieter artists, because naturally they are usually the ones that get cut off. And then Sri was also talking about representation being proportional to the population in the UAE, and how that, touching on that last, that the local versus international, and how these are times where we could potentially balance that proportion. So that's from my group. I don't know, Sultan, my group might actually have been the best group.
Okay, did we cover everybody? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so this is running a little bit longer than we had originally thought it would, but I think we can take another 7 minutes. Any remaining, there's a really amazing chat happening too. Thank you guys. I kind of like this dual chatting and talking situation. Although I suppose we're not really supposed to be able to pay attention to 2 streams of thought at once. Murtaza says, folks keep talking about the lack of art criticism. Criticism is a very precarious vocation. Maybe it is time that institutions start supporting it. It would definitely cut the carbon footprint. And he's getting a round of support for that. Other things people want to say they didn't get a chance to get to yet. Now's your time. I think if you raise your blue hand using the participants window, Sebastian will unmute you, or you could.
So I'm gonna unmute Bill because he had his hand up for a while now.
Okay, thank you. Some of the comments that I was going to make, I kind of threw in the chat, which were sort of responses to various questions about sort of service and audience. I want to, I guess, kind of open up another question that struck me as I was listening. First, I think that some of the phrases earlier about Rami describing the scene as collaborative, not competitive, Antonia describing it as porous, was very much my experience when I came here working in performing arts. People like Antonia and Sultan and Maya and Bana really, really welcome me. And that is my experience, that we are all talking to one another. I was also really struck by the sort of constant refrain of seeing a gap in just saying we need to do this, which I think many of the founders sort of identified that. And so I'm curious, as we see the scene maturing and seeing the, you know, so many different activities, almost year by year, there are different players. So as we're thinking about sort of defining our responsibility to the community, in the beginning, that responsibility is largely predicated on the absence. And as it continues to fill in, those roles become a little bit more defined. So I'm curious about how people think about that issue of your responsibility to the community, and then how it evolves as the sector grows and as you don't occupy as much space and you have to find a niche, and how people are thinking about sort of that constant revision of their responsibility and how they define their roles in conversation with one another, both across Emirates, but also across disciplines and sectors.
Can you put that into like a very short question? How do we, I want to see if I can rephrase it. How do we interact across sectors? What can we do to interact across sectors? Is this what you're, yeah, I think we need
the first question was, how do you see your responsibility across to the community? So if anyone wants to address that question while Bill is typing the rest of his, let us know.
That's why you can also multitasking.
Yeah, you can also raise your hand in your video screen. I'll try to catch you because there are 4 pages here. Antonia, I see your hand, and then Rami as well.
Yeah, I didn't know whether this was our segment to carry on speaking, or really it's for everybody else, but just very, very quickly, I think one of the things we used to refer to this, Bill, a little bit as a kind of washing machine cycle. So when now the community here is much more settled and very long term, But there was a period where people were coming, going the whole time, and every time they arrived, they would say, I am the first to do this, and this is a completely unique program. And then they would start the washing machine cycle, and then they would leave, and a new one would come and do the same. So it felt a little bit as though there was a kind of lack of awareness of history, and also of what everyone else was doing across the different emirates. So I think it's important for us to have, and this will, the more archives we have, the more education that's locally based in both languages, the more kind of obvious those histories are, then this will kind of obviously negate that kind of feeling of going round and round in the same kind of cycles. And I think and also kind of just research. I mean, it's very obvious what different people are doing, and there's no need to kind of replicate it because there's still so much to do. So I think that's a kind of really fundamental way of kind of thinking about things.
And Rami, do you want to respond? And then Murtaza, I'll unmute you right after.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think what we have in common is that we're all facilitators.
Mm.
That's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah. And Murtaza, you're welcome to speak. I think.
Yeah, I just thank you very much for that. It was actually really lovely to go back in time and actually also just to hear from all of you guys, and what I was struck by was actually how after like 15 or 20 years, all of you guys are still there. Because one of the things that's kind of like problematic, or not problematic, but difficult about writing histories in the UAE is this condition of transience, where so many of the critics who have come through and have contributed very like vehemently or rigorously have only been around for 2 or 3 years, like Arsalan Muhammad, Chris Lord, or even Melissa Gronan, although she's still contributing from London. So that was one of the things where I was just like, how do we work against that, given that that is a condition of being in that part of the world? So that was one thing that I kind of wanted to throw out there and see, because in some sense, creating history requires a longevity of presence, because otherwise people forget and then have to relearn this kind of washing machine cycle that Antonia was talking about as well. And then the other thing I just wanted to kind of like underline again is the importance of writing and research. I mean, in the UAE, I'm always blown away by the fact that they give awards for patronage. And that's like it's an award for philanthropy. And I'm just like, philanthropists have the money to give away. I don't know if they need to be feted. And while on the other hand, like, a diverse art ecology consists of all sorts of individuals, and a lot of them are young and emerging. And those are the people who need to be supported for the scene to grow and expand.
Thank you, Murtaza.
Hi, Murtaza, good to hear you. I agree with you 100%. And, one thing in our protest against forgetting, as Hans Ulrich would say, is that we've documented everything that we've ever done. And I'm not trying to be like, we're amazing because we did that, but also because, there was always this fear. And I think that if you grew up in the Gulf or in Dubai, you always, that's the feeling of transience is a real, like you always feel like people are going to go away. Like nothing really lasts forever. And it's like almost like a fear that you have to overcome, like, as you get older and you're like, no, something, so somehow like I always had this thing that we had to keep everything. And we also did work very early on with writers like yourself. And we every time we did an exhibition, we would, ask for an essay or a conversation or something, because we realized the importance of that. And it was really hard at the beginning because there was not a lot of people that we could call on, actually. I mean, and also I'm seeing in the chat, people talking about the artists, there was no ecosystem. There was no, and because people kept leaving, even now. So, you'd find a great, you find your little group of, great writers or researchers, and then they would go away. So it's not just us that has to stay, but others have to stay too. And I think that's just a larger question. And is that going to change? And when I said it feels like 2005, what I was trying to reference is it feels like a time where things were, can begin again. And maybe, and the fact that nobody could leave means everyone stays, which is great. So, but you're right. I agree with you. And I also think the prizes for patronage, not necessary. But, beyond that, yeah, I mean, we kept our archives, and I always think about that. I always think, well, at the end, maybe we just, we should just have, and we, have it out, I don't know, to somewhere on a computer that people could just come and access and look at everything. We have images, we have text, we have everything we did. And I think everyone here has kept their archives. So I think that there is probably a lot of us that have that. And also there are people, making films now, like our friends Shihab and Samira Patel are making the film about the sort of that moment of the beginning of, these, the Dubai kids that, did their small part in what's happened now. So, it is happening. But yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly that it's not just shows, it's also the writing and the research and all of everyone that comes together for that moment to culminate. I agree with that. I agree.
Okay, we are now going into overtime. Should we revisit this conversation? Do people want to come back and keep talking, arguing, reminiscing, or should we let the moment be this moment? I'm gonna ask everyone that we write up from the recording. We're going to write up notes on what the different sections reported back, and I'll also save the archives. And for the people who registered, we can send that around, but we'll also be sending the recording. The breakout rooms don't get recorded, so what happened in there is for you to know and for us to find out in the way that it's been reported. Do we have any final rounds of things, burning concerns, or shall we just checking? Nobody looks like they're on fire. I think we'll be
Where's
okay.
the after party?
Huh?
Where's the after party?
The after no, this is the problem with Zoom. I want to go to the after party now.
On your place. Huh? We're all coming now.
Okay, I'll see you over there. Thank you guys so much. And thank you to the incredible team at the NYU AD Art Gallery for making this possible. It was an incredible amount of work to get the archives up online to the Pointed Archives, but we know it matters. And thank you to my colleagues for being willing to do this crazy workshop. It was really fun in the end. It was a little terrifying, but really fun. So thank you so much. And thank you, Bana, for keeping us organized and thinking of the important questions. Yeah, thank you so much. She's calling in from Seattle, by the way. It's like sunrise her time. So she's hardcore.
Thank you for hosting.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. We're
Have a
gonna
good
log
night.
out now. Have a good night.